What's up, party people? This is Mr. Oliver here, back with another track. Today, we're talking about the Catholic Counter-Reformation. Okay, technically, first things first, I'm the realist. There's two different terms here. There's the Catholic Reformation, and there's the Catholic Counter-Reformation. Technically, those are two different things. The Catholic Reformation is when they work on reforming themselves and start new religious orders and things like that. The Counter-Reformation is when they try to push out and stop the growth of Protestantism. For the sake of this lecture, since this is an introductory course, I'm going to call it the same thing and just say it's the Counter-Reformation. But I just wanted to let you know, I know. Anyway, we're going to talk religious warfare first, though, because it's what we do. And we got to start over in France, because a lot of people in France were converting to Calvinism. And the term for these French Calvinists was Huguenots. And some people were doing it for faith. Other people were doing it as an excuse for independence. Basically as a way of kind of saying, yo, Catholic Church, kind of feel like you're coming down hard on us and, expecting too much as far as tithes go. Maybe there's land that had to be donated for the folks over in the monasteries and whatnot. And if you're a Huguenot, if you're a Protestant, in other words, you don't have to do that no more. So that might be a reason. It's kind of like the German princes. There were some that probably thought, hey, this is a faith-based thing. And there were others who were like, oh, economically, this good. So that's that. Along comes this pair of lovebirds. That was not very well there. See, that's look at that handsome couple right there. This is Henry of Navarre, and he is a Huguenot, and he's set to marry the King of France's sister. And check her out. That do is really kind of a don't, but it's Margaret of Valois, and the Valois, of course, is the last name of most of the kings we've talked about thus far. Your Louis the 11th, your Louis the 12th, your Charles the 7th, Henry the 2nd, and of course now Henry the 3rd. So they get married. That's them getting married. And this is kind of a way of trying to say, look, we're going to try to be tolerant between our Catholic and our Protestant brethren here in France. But some people, you already know what's going to happen, don't you? Some people are going to be haters because, as many great philosophers have said, haters are going to hate. They can't shake this one off, however, because there is a massacre in August of 1574, 6 days, I believe, after Henry and Margaret get married. There's a big massacre. Catholics organize attacks against Huguenots all over Paris. And it is a slaughterhouse. And you can see in this painting here, you got all kinds of malfeasance. You got people being tortured and beaten. There's stacks of bodies. There's a dog. There's always dogs in history. People are always including animals because they love dogs. Cats, I'm a cat guy. Cats are not very popular at this time in history. They're seen as bad luck and often identified with witches. So, So there's a war. Huguenot fights Catholic. So you got, on one, you got Henry the Third. He is a Catholic. He is the king. He is the brother of Margaret. And he is kind of an odd duck for the time period. It's hard to tell exactly what's true and what's false about him. Here's what's definitely true. The man carried around a Bichon frisé in a basket around his neck because he loved them. He had many of them. Here's what's speculation and likely true. he was homosexual. He was perhaps not necessarily true, because it's hard to tell, for reasons we'll get into in a second, might also have been a cross-dresser, dressed like a woman. This is the 1500s. This is not a tolerant period. So there are a lot of Catholics who felt he was a bad guy, and herein lies the problem. He might not have been homosexual at all. Evidence seems to push that way, since he had a lot of close male companions and didn't really show much interest in the ladies. But who knows? Maybe he was just playing the field. We don't know. But the problem is that he had a lot of enemies, and the worst thing that you could drag somebody with back then was saying, homie is a homosexual. So that would be like, oh my God, you don't mean that. And then his defenders would be like, oh my God, you can't really believe that, because they're Catholic. And they're like, well, he was definitely not a homosexual. And the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter if he was a homosexual. It didn't affect his ability to be king. But because of this, at least perception, it was used against him in a nasty way. He was definitely kind of more into the arts and the reading instead of the sports. That doesn't mean he wasn't into the sports too. Homie can do both. But he was thought of as being more artsy, and that probably contributed to some of the rumors about him. Then you got our boy, Henry of Navarre. Henry of Navarre is from the Bourbon family, correctly pronounced Bourbon. And he is a Huguenot, which, as you recall, French Calvinist. And we need one more Henry, because it says up here, it says 3 Henrys. Who's the third? It's going to be another Catholic. Wait, what? This is Henry of Guise. He is a member of the Catholic League that thought Henry III was a bad king. See, Henry III was the 3rd son to become king of Catherine de' Medici. Yes, de' Medici, that family. Same one from Florence back in the previous chapter where we talked about the Renaissance. And Henry of Guise wanted power for his family. So he was one of the guys spreading all these rumors. Perhaps he was reporting the truth, but reporting it in a way that was attacking rather than tolerant. I don't know. But he said, like, oh, yo, we got to take these people out. So there is a civil war where the Catholic League, and that's Henry of Guise, he's Catholic nobility, going against another Catholic, Henry III, and Henry of Navarre, who is not Catholic at all. And it often gets lumped under religious warfare because we do have Protestants and Catholics fighting in the forces of all 3 of these guys. Well, Henry III invites Henry of Guise to a dinner wherein he shanks him and murders him, or at least he has someone do it. But either way, it's kind of a mafia-type move. Kills that guy. Later on, another Catholic murders Henry III. Also shanked him. And it leaves Henry of Navarre. And Henry III, on his deathbed, because he gets stabbed, but he doesn't just die. He's like, yo, get me my people. Surgeon. He did a surgery right then, and this is 16th century surgery, which is not good. And he has no anesthetic. He's getting stitches, and they're trying to get him all stitched up, and he's handling it. And then he says, well, look like I'm going to die. Guess I'll die. And so he calls up Henry of Navarre, and he's all like, yo, dog, I need you to come over here. And he's like, yeah, listen, last time you invited someone over, you stabbed them? And he's like, nah, not this time. Look, I got stabbed already. I'm not going to kill you. And he says, you need to change your religion, Henry of Navarre. And Henry of Navarre is like, if I change my religion, in many ways, that's what we were fighting about this whole time. Weren't we fighting Protestant versus Catholic? Wasn't I? Oh, never mind. Yes, of course. I'll become king if I change my religion, so I'll sacrifice my personal beliefs in order to become king. He kind of just rolls like that. So a famous quote that is attributed to him is, Paris is worth a mass. In other words, it's worth it to take Catholic mass in order to become king. And he is now Henry the Fourth. That is, some people get confused about this. It basically means he's the fourth king named Henry in France. Has nothing to do with the Henrys over in England, nothing to do with any Henrys anywhere else. He's the fourth king by the name of Henry in France. It begins the Bourbon dynasty. That's the one we're going to have for the rest of the class. So if you're sitting there going like, I wonder if these Bourbons will be successful. Yes, they will be successful. In fact, Henry of Navarre is a very popular king, generally considered to be pretty good, sometimes called Henry the Great, not called that by his wife Margaret. They cannot have a child. She is not able to bear children, and that's pretty much your major job as queen. So they have their own squabbles. At one point, she attempts a coup. You know how couples are. But at the end of it, they have their marriage annulled, which means it's not a divorce. It never happened. And they can say, well, never had a baby, so you have no evidence that we ever, Henry of Navarre had numerous mistresses, and he definitely was, doing what he did. But Margaret, not so much. Henry will remarry to Marie de Medici, who is I think, cousin of Catherine de Medici, and he will bear a child named, she actually is the one who had the baby, who is Louis the 13th. And there we go. We begin that big old streak of Louis we're going to have for the next couple of months. The most important thing that Henry IV does as far as this point in the class goes is he issues the Edict of, incorrectly said, Nantes, rhymes with pants. Correctly said is more like Nantes, Edict of Nantes. If you say Nantes, that's fine, as long as you don't say Nantes, which sounds super American. I said here it grants religious tolerance to the Protestants. This is not really true, but if you remember one thing, just remember that. Technically, it says, hey, Protestants can have their own cities, and they can defend those cities. They can wall them off and have Protestant places, which is kind of like a safe place for them. Like, these Huguenots can have a place where no Catholics are going to harass them. This is as close to religious tolerance as we're going to get at this point in history. So that's why I went ahead and said that. So meanwhile, let's talk about another Catholic empire, the other major Catholic empire, the Holy Roman Empire. And their leader at this time is Charles V. You might recall him from being the guy that puts Luther in front of the Diet of Worms and says, yo, you got to take back everything, renounce what you have said. And Luther's all like, no, sorry, not sorry. And he's all like, what? He is Mr. Charles V, which literally means manly. He's a young man when he takes over, and he's trying to be a defender of Christendom. He's trying to keep everybody united. Everything in yellow is his territory. That ain't bad. You got everything from Spain. You got this middle part here. There's a little bit in the Dutch lands there. That's the Austrian Netherlands. You got southern Italy. You've, of course, got modern Austria and a little bit of Germany. Now, the reason this is going to be not under direct control is because, okay, it's complicated. Here's the brief explanation. These guys are the most important German princes are electors who elect the emperor. And essentially it works like you bribed the people to be like, yo, electors, this is who you're going to vote for. Here's a bunch of money. And sometimes there was competing, people they wanted, candidates, but it usually pretty much went the way of whoever could bribe the most electors. So it's not directly under the control of the Holy Roman Empire, but they have a lot of influence, and they're a major power right here in the East. In fact, at this time, Russia is still getting their swag on. They're not really doing their thing yet, but the Holy Roman Empire is doing they're living their best life. The major wars with the Habsburgs. One, you've got the Habsburg-Valois Wars. Mr. Oliver, who's Habsburg? That's the Holy Roman Empire. The ruling family is called the Habsburgs. It will be until they die, until the Holy Roman Empire goes away. They are the Habsburg Empire. They are situated out of Vienna. And they are fighting against the Valois. Remember who the Valois were? Where are they from? Well, it says it right there. Holy Roman Empire versus France, fighting over land, mostly fighting over disputed land, over places that can't defend themselves very well. Mackay in chapter 12 discusses how there's a bunch of fighting in Italy, but he didn't really explain why. It's the French and the Holy Roman Empire fighting over that. Eventually it takes on a little bit of a religious type struggle because there is some Germanic land as well that's under dispute. Long story short, it ends with the peace of Cateau-Cambrai. If I have any French students right there, they're like, you said it wrong. I tried. He also is going to go against the Schmalkaldic League. That is not even in the book. It's very interesting to me that Mackay does not even mention the Schmalkaldic League. The Schmalkaldic League is a bunch of German Protestants, Lutherans, who are like, Holy Roman Empire, we don't want to be Catholic. And the Holy Roman Empire, Charles V, is like, no, you're gonna be Catholic, young man, and also old man. And they fight. And you got Germans from some of these states versus the Holy Roman Empire, who's also going to be, as you're going to see, they're fighting over in Italy as well. They're divided. And eventually they make peace with the Germans, and they say, look, Schmalkaldic League, you win. The Peace of Augsburg says, Cuius regio, ius religio. Which, of course, as you all speak Latin, so you probably already know this, but just for the one or two kids who don't, I'm going to say, it means he who rules his religion. So, whoever is in charge in these German states, the prince, that is, then his religion. So if the prince is Lutheran, they're Lutheran. All the people who live there are Lutheran. You don't get a choice of your religion. The prince is Lutheran, so everybody who lives there, Lutheran. So for example, in Saxony, homie is Lutheran. Guess what, everybody? You're Lutheran too. I'm not. You are. Prince is Catholic. Guess what? You're Catholic. We already were. Good. But we're thinking about... No, don't convert. So, Cuius regio, ius religio. He who rules his religion. This is a baller move to memorize that and drop it into essays later on in the year, because Augsburg will be relevant as kind of a precursor to the 30 Years' War, where there's more struggles. Because if you remember just now, I said you're either Lutheran or Catholic. And you might be like, what about you? You messed up, Mr. Oliver. What about the Anabaptists? What about the Calvinists? Etc., etc. No, you had two choices, Lutheran or Catholic. That's it. It's not going to be until the 30 Years' War, and specifically 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia, or Peace of Westphalia, wherein they expand that to Calvinism as well. Charles V eventually gets angry and leaves. You know how it is. Sometimes you just want to leave and just be like, listen, I done goofed. I messed up. Europe is religiously divided now. This is worse than that one time in the Middle Ages that France decided it had its own pope. It's awkward. So Charles V is like, listen, we got a big empire. It's hard to rule anyway. So I'm going to give Spain and the Netherlands to my son. My son's name is Philip, and that's a misspelling right there. It should be Philip with one L, Philip. And then what about the eastern part? East side? What about them? That's going to be my bro Ferdinand the First. And I made him spin on the way in for no reason in particular. The one, if you want to remember this, Charles V, he goes off. Some people say that he becomes a hermit. I don't think that's true, where he lives off alone, away from everyone else. But it's a good story. Philip is going to be the mover and the shaker that tries to do a bunch of stuff, is mostly unsuccessful, and ends up influencing history more. Whereas Ferdinand I pretty much just kind of chills and doesn't really have any kind of massive stress happening. And the reason Philip is going to have trouble is because of the Dutch place, the Netherlands. And of course, the Dutch place is right over there, the Netherlands. And this is, windmills, wooden shoes, all of that. And also, oh, guess what? Brand new, Protestantism. A lot of the people become Huguenots, or Calvinists, more accurately. Huguenot is just a thing you would say for France. And the people are like, look, we like the way Calvin emphasizes a strong work ethic and puts profit next to piety, I guess you could say. It's okay to go out and earn money. The Dutch are major traders. They're going around, they're trading with people all over the world. And so Philip's like, listen, I'm going to make you become Catholic. And the Dutch are like, no thank you. We would like to stay Protestant. Now, Charles V was actually... he was actually a lot closer. He actually had Dutch blood in him, whereas Philip is a Spaniard. So Charles V had mild repression. He disapproved definitely of what the Dutch were doing. But Philip II is like, oh, no. We are going to send people over. And he sends the Duke of Alba, who sets up a justice system. And see if this sounds familiar. It's a justice system run by Spain with a small council that decides crimes for people who are Dutch, and there's no Protestants on the council. Mr. Oliver, this reminds me somewhat of the American situation where they were upset that the British were making the decisions for them and didn't really have any sympathy to their cause. Yeah, I think so. I think you could make that analogy. The Dutch did not like it. Sometimes you see the Council of Troubles as the name of it. I prefer the Council of Blood because that's a better name. This is the way it was. You had the Duke of Alba here. People would come in. Thousands of Dutch Protestants were written up on all kinds of charges, some legitimate, lots illegitimate, at least perceived that way by the Dutch Protestants. And some were tortured, some were killed. They were not fans of Philip and his policies. This is a famous painting by Peter Bruegel, and it is called The Slaughter of the Innocents. What army do you see in this painting? Well, the army is the Spaniards, and the innocents are the Dutch. And you see the army coming in, oppressing the people, hitting them, knocking them down. People are begging for help. There's a dog, another dog. It's showing that the Spaniards are unjust to their treatment of the Dutch. So the Dutch are desperate. They call up England. Now, of course, when I say call up, I'm joking, but they write England and they say, hey, England, help. You're Protestant too. And you might be like, well, yeah, but England's a different kind of Protestant. There are different types. In the Netherlands, you got Calvinists, whereas in England, you have Anglican, or, I guess you could also say, the Church of England. But Elizabeth I is very sentimental, or at least not sentimental, but she's sympathetic to the Dutch. She's no dummy. Elizabeth is a very smart lady, and she knows if the Dutch fall to the Spaniards, and if they become re-Catholicized, then the Spaniards are going to come looking for them eventually too. So, England sends money and troops. Eventually, in the northern parts of the Netherlands, they become independent. This becomes known as the Union of Utrecht. Utrecht is spelled kind of like it sounds. To me, it sounds a little bit like a sound a cat would make as it's vomiting. But Utrecht, U-T-R-E-C-H-T, that's the answer right there. And the southern provinces remain under Spanish control, and they stay Catholic. So the northern part becomes Calvinist, whereas the southern part becomes or stays Catholic officially. They'll continue to have a struggle there. Eventually, they'll end up getting reunited, and it feels so good. But prior to that, not so much. Philip II is not cool with this. He doesn't like that the English helped. He doesn't like that the Union of Utrecht are defying him. And the Pope says, listen, Philip, I understand you're trying to do good by me. I appreciate that. Maybe you can help me out with a problem. It's called England. Maybe England could become Catholic again. And Philip's like, I'm listening. And the Pope's like, maybe I could give you some money if you re-Catholicize them. If you conquer them, defeat them. And all it is Elizabeth. She's a lady, and we're sexist at this time in history. So you can go over there, no problem. NP, no problem. So Philip takes his Spanish navy, known as the Armada, because it was such a mighty big old navy. And he rolls up in 1588, and oh goodness, this does not look good for the Spaniards. Yeah, the Spanish lose. This is the kind of thing that if you get into naval history, you can study. But long story short, the British, or the English, sorry, have more maneuverable boats. And even though they are outnumbered, they are victorious. They're fighting for their survival. Queen Elizabeth gets out there and says, like, listen, I know I'm just a feeble woman, but if I could get out there and fight, I would, because I have the soul of a man, and I want to fight. And she gets everybody all pumped up. And they're like, let's go fight for our lady boss. And they win. So what about the Catholic Counter-Reformation I brought up on the first slide? Well, the Reformation part, as all of this other stuff is going on, the Catholics are like, listen, let's get our house in order. They invite the Protestants to show up at the Council of Trent. The Protestants are like, listen, at this point, we've done our own thing. We are never, ever, ever getting back together. And so they don't come. Also, they're concerned that the Catholics might murder them, which is always a threat. Anytime you have these different religions at this time in history, they can say like, hey, you want to come over? You might die. So maybe think about that double before you do it. This is the Catholic view of Luther. It shows him as the seven-headed beast from the book of Revelation, a hypocrite, a fanatic. It's a bunch of things. It's just propaganda against Luther. This is showing Luther as the devil's bagpipe, that the devil here, who has like a belly demon. So that's kind of a strange look. And he's playing Luther, and Luther's words are coming straight from the devil. He's playing the devil's tune. So that's rough. Poor Luther there. That's not, I actually had a kid ask once, like, did Luther really get beheaded? No, Luther was not beheaded. This is a political cartoon, basically. This is not, the devil did not really show up and start playing Luther's head like an instrument. That's a weird thing to assume. So the Council of Trent, what do they say? They say the primary beliefs and doctrines of the Catholic Church are all correct. So again, sorry, not sorry. We were not wrong about anything. We could be a little bit more strict. We have been a little lax with some of our discipline. You think, really? Alexander VI, the Pope that was having, fun parties, having kids, multiple popes having kids, prostitutes all over Rome. Yeah, but again, keep in mind, the Catholic Church is not bad. There were people within the Catholic Church that were bad. I'm not saying that all of the popes were corrupt. I am saying Alexander VI was. But I'm not even saying that most of the priests were. There were some. And the problem with an organization like the Catholic Church is, if you're in a position where people notice you, they can start making generalizations about you, and it's hard to respond unless you have, some kind of way to be like, well, look, that's, statistically, blah, blah, blah. But when it's the Pope, it's hard to say like, oh, the leader of your church is bad. He's doing bad things. He's declaring war on people, which is not very Jesus-like, and he is also fathering children and blah, blah, blah. It's hard to come back from that. So they reaffirm some of their discipline and whatnot. Here's a question. What about indulgences? Indulgences were a major cause of all this stuff. The Catholic Church says, nope, indulgences are fine. Case closed. Well, but do they sell indulgences today? No. A couple of months later, maybe years, the Catholic Church kind of just quietly stopped selling indulgences and just never talk about it. The Catholic Church maintains that Luther always exaggerated what was being promised and stuff like that. Luther, of course, felt very strongly about it. So, you know, you can pick your side there. We do know John Tetzel. We actually have text of some of his speeches, so we know what he said. But perhaps he was an outlier. Perhaps he was not, you know, representing what the church was going for, just to be fair. There are some new religious orders that are created. The Jesuits, aka the Society of Jesus, headed by former soldier and super strict disciplinarian Ignatius of Loyola. Loyola is still a Catholic college today. You might remember them from if you've ever watched college basketball. And the Ursuline Order of Nuns, and this is Angela Merici. And they're basically all about education. And the Ursuline Order is a big deal because it's the first time that women really could be offered a path to education. If you wanted to be an educated woman, the best way to do it was become a nun. It's, you know, maybe not necessarily fair, but at least there was beginning to be options. Also, there was a new form of art, and this is the art of the Counter-Reformation. It will evolve over time to go from being ecclesiastical, which is a fancy word for religious, to kind of a like, oh, this is a secular or non-religious thing that focuses on, you know, everyday life or stuff like that. But at the beginning, it is super emotional art that portrays stories from the Bible that is meant to get your illiterate people and say, whoa, this gets me here. It's like, this is what the Catholic Church can offer you. This is why we're special. This is our long history. You know, we've been around for like over 1,000 years, over, 1,500 years. We got a long history. This is what we're bringing to the table. It's meant to capture your heart, to play to your heart. The colors I wrote there are brighter than bright. The blacks are darker than dark. And the architecture is meant to say, we are a magnificent organization that is meant to inspire. This is part of St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. You can see that there. It's very ornate. In fact, the word Baroque is sometimes used as a synonym with ornate, like fancy. This is an interior of a Dominican. That's a Catholic monastical order, monks, basically. This is some of the art. I want to just pay attention to this. You got Caravaggio. This represents St. Francis of Assisi. Look at how dark the darks are, and then how the angel here in the foreground pops. He's obviously more important, but he looks otherworldly, which is what they're going for, obviously, because it's an angel of God. You can see here, who's your primary figure? It's Jesus. Shrouded in darkness are the people who are beating him. They are whipping him. It is meant to evoke sympathy for Christ. It is meant to make you realize the suffering he went through. This is meant to pull at your heartstrings. Here's another one, David and Goliath. This is David having stood triumphant after working, praying. He's blessed by God. He defeats Goliath, and this mighty figure is being beheaded. When we say darker than dark, did you notice that a lot of the subject matter is a bit dark? Like as far as grim? Yes. This is the daughter of Herod, I believe, that asked for the head of John the Baptist. and it's being presented to her as her handmaiden looks on. In some traditions, the handmaiden is actually a Christian or converts to Christianity. This is another story from, I believe, the Old Testament of Judith, who is I believe that there was a story where this guy Holofernes had committed an act against somebody. I don't recall exactly who, and I'm not going to look it up because I've already gone 36 minutes and I'm trying to not go more than 30. But it's basically she is getting revenge, not only for herself, but he is also a leader of an anti-Jewish force. This one's interesting because Artemisia Gentileschi is a woman. You don't see a lot of female painters at this time in history, but Gentileschi is. And this is Peter Paul Rubens. Peter Paul Rubens is a good example of a dude that is going to go from religious art to being identified with half-naked ladies and images of romance and stuff like that. He starts off super religious. This is them putting Jesus on the cross here. Again, still dark, but you're starting to see some really bright brights here. Look at that. Look at the blue and the red there. They really pop off the canvas. And then by later on, he's like, yeah, you know what? We also got little angels, little cherubs flying around in the air. Everybody's in love. It's fun. So Rubens kind of runs the whole gamut. All right, that's all for now. Talk to you again after a while.